Masechet Baba Batra Daf Kof Mem Bet. The discussion today is about whether a fetus can acquire property or not. Rav Huna yesterday gave his opinion that a fetus cannot acquire property. And we asked a question against Rav Huna from our Mishnah, where it says that if a father says his wife is pregnant, says, if my wife gives birth to a boy, then I want to give it 100 dinar, and so on. That works. Eventually, if it's a boy, if it's a girl, then the transfer does work. It seems, according to the Mishnah, that one can transfer money to a fetus. So Rav Huna said, well, that Mishnah goes according to nobody. There is no opinion, no Tanaitic opinion that thinks that a fetus can acquire anything. And so that was Rav Huna said. So we presented a number of possibilities. Why? Well, maybe we can reconcile the Mishnah in one way or another to benefit Rav Huna. Rav Huna could have answered and said, oh yes, I know that Mishnah. Why do you have to say there's no author? Why didn't he say that the Mishnah is talking about a case where the father said, when she gives birth, I want to transfer 100, if it's a boy, I want to transfer 100 dinar to my child when it's born. It's not going to transfer now, but even though right now I'm saying it, and right now it's a fetus, I'm saying now that I want it to be transferred eventually when it's born. So why didn't he answer that? And the answer is that Rav Huna letamed, Amar Rav Huna af lichsheled lo kana. Rav Huna says, even if you say it with that language, that I want the transfer to take effect when she gives birth, nevertheless the fetus does not acquire it, because he's saying it now, and the fetus cannot acquire anything now, and so it doesn't work even if he adds when it's born. Now we're going to find the source for that. Damar Rav Nachman, Hamzakelu ubad lo kana, lichteled kana. Rav Huna amar af lichteled lo kana. V'Rav Sheshat amar echad zeh v'echad zeh kana. We have a three-way machloket between Amoraim. Rav Nachman says that if someone transfers ownership of some item to a fetus, it doesn't work. But if he adds the words when it's born, then that works, because then it will happen later when it's born and it actually exists. That's Rav Nachman is a middle opinion. Rav Huna says, no, it certainly doesn't work if you say I want to transfer it now. And even if you say I want to transfer money to the fetus when it's born, it also doesn't work because you're saying it now. And so you have to wait till it's born and only say it then. So that's where we see the source, what we just quoted from Rav Huna. But then we have a third opinion, Rav Sheshat, who says, no matter what, you can. If a father, even if it's a fetus, the father says, I want to transfer $100 to this fetus, then the fetus acquires it. Even in utero, it can acquire something, and for sure, if he added lichteled. So now we're going to spend some time analyzing Rav Sheshat. Amar Rav Sheshat, mina amin Allah, de Tanya, ger shemet ubizbezu Yisrael nechasav. ושמעו שיש לו בן או שהייתה אשתו מעוברת, חייבים להחזיר. החזירו הכל, ואחר כך שמעו שמת בנו, או שהפילה אשתו, החזיק בשנייה קנה, בראשונה לא קנה. Rav Sheshat, how do I know that a fetus can acquire property? From the following baraita. Let's say you have a convert who died, and right now there's no obvious heirs. Convert, someone who was not Jewish, and then converts, all of his biological relatives are no longer his legal relatives, and if he has no children, then all of his property just becomes a free-for-all. So, a convert who died, and then a bunch of Jews went and heard the convert died, and they assumed for the moment that he did not have any children, and so they each plundered the property. This guy took his couch, that guy took his television, and they all grabbed it, because whoever grabs it first can get it. But then they heard a rumor that actually he has a son, or they heard a rumor that his wife is pregnant, and therefore there is someone to inherit him, so they cannot keep this stuff. They have to go return it, bring back the couch, bring back the television, so that that potential heir can take it, because that's what they heard. So now they bring everything back, they return it. And then they hear a second rumor, which turns out to be the conclusion, that he did have a son, but the son died. His wife was pregnant, but she miscarried. Hooray! Everybody's celebrating. Well, they shouldn't. Too bad for that. For the mom and for the child, but for them, now it means that his property is once again hefker. And so now they go and grab it. But this time, different people grab it. Some other guy takes the couch, someone else takes the television. So now they're fighting over it. The guy who took the television the first time says, I took it first, but then I had to return it because I heard there was a rumor that he had a son. But I got it first beforehand, so I should have it. And the guy who gets it second says, no, I get it because you returned it, and that time you returned it, that son was alive, and so it wasn't yours to take. Only after the son died, then I legitimately took it, and so it's mine. So the law is that the guy who grabbed it the second time around is the rightful grabber, and the guy that got it the first time is not, because although he grabbed it assuming there was no heir, at that time actually there was an heir, right? Let's say there was a child alive. So there was a child alive. You had no right to grab it. So that's what you had to give it back. Only after the kid dies, now there's no heir, so only the second people who grab the stuff, they actually get it. That's the Baraita. Now let's analyze what the proof is. If you say that a fetus cannot acquire anything, then why do they need to take possession the second time around? They already took possession the first time around. In other words, in the case where everybody grabs it, and then they hear that she is pregnant, that his wife is pregnant. Now, if you say that a fetus cannot acquire, so then still it's just a fetus. So that fetus doesn't acquire anything. So then, okay, let's say they give it back because they presume that it's going to be a healthy child. That's what they think. So they give it back. Turns out, actually she had a miscarriage. The child was never born. This fetus always remained a fetus. Was never born into an actual child. In that case, no one was around actually to inherit it, and so whoever grabbed the television the first time around should be the one who should be the rightful person to keep it. And yet that's not the conclusion of the Baraita. Instead, the Baraita assumes that the fetus does acquire it, even in utero. And therefore, the guy that took the television the first time around, he says, there's a fetus, I have to give it back. And the fetus owns that stuff. And then, only after the fetus is miscarried and dies, then it's all up for grabs again. But it's actually up for grabs for the first time, in fact, in reality, because it was never up for grabs the first time around, because there was a fetus. So only if after the fetus dies, then whoever grabs it after that is the rightful owner and not the first one. So that's Rav Sheshat's pretty brilliant inference that a fetus can in fact acquire property. Amar Abaye, Yerusha ba'ame'eleh hashane, Rava amar shane hatam derapuye merapeyan b'idaihu me'ikara. Abaye and Rava reject this proof for different reasons. Abaye says, no, this is talking about inheritance. An inheritance that comes by itself is different from a gift. Inheritance, you don't have to do anything to inherit. Someone dies, that's it, the heirs automatically inherit. So a fetus can do this because it's very passive, and a fetus is kind of passive. So a fetus can, just by being around, just by existing as a fetus, can acquire inheritance. That's what you prove from here. But there's no proof that there's no proof that a gift can be given to a fetus, and that's the case of our Mishnah. That's which we were trying to interpret. In our Mishnah, the father says, "I'm going to give a gift of 100 dinar to my fetus, to this fetus, if it's a son. But this is a gift, and a gift requires not only a giver, it also requires more of an active receiver, which a fetus cannot do. And therefore, Abaye says you cannot prove from this case of inheritance that a fetus can receive a gift. Rava has a different reason for rejecting it. He says this case is different because the initial grabbing was only loose in their hands. Doesn't mean physically loose, that they were holding the television with not with a bad grip. It means that they actually didn't know for sure if the convert had heirs or not. So they said, well, just in case this convert has no heirs, let's go and grab it. But initially, they didn't fully know that it would be theirs, so they didn't have full da'at, full mental acquisition to say, oh, this is for sure mine. They just grabbed it like just in case it turns out there's no heirs. So that's why they kind of grabbed it, but didn't fully even mentally take ownership over it, and then they returned it. And so that's why they don't get it, because even if a fetus does not acquire anything. In fact, the fetus doesn't acquire. But when they grabbed the television the first time, they didn't really have fully in mind. It wasn't fully in their heads. And then they returned it. So they never had it in the first place. And therefore, when the fetus dies, and then they know for sure, oh, there's no other kids and the fetus is dead. And the second guy who comes and grabs it with a full grip, with full mental intention to acquire it 100%. And that's why the second one will get it and not the first. And there's actually no proof from here at all that a fetus can acquire. My benai, what will be the difference between Abaye and Rava's answers? A practical distinction. The difference is in a case where at first they heard that the fetus died. In other words, and they were sure about it. They thought it ended up being wrong because he didn't actually die. And then the fetus did actually die. So when they heard the first rumor that the fetus died, everybody went and grabbed it. And in this time, when they grabbed it, the first time around even, they grabbed it with full intention, thinking that, oh, there is no fetus because they heard the fetus died. Therefore, in that case, according to Abaye, inheritance that comes by itself, a fetus can get. So the fetus did have ownership over the couch and the television and the land and all that. Even though the people that grabbed it had full intention, they were totally wrong because the fetus actually acquired it. Then the fetus actually died. So then the first guys who took it have nothing because their fetus was alive and owned it. Only the second guys have it. So according to Abaye, in that case, the second guys would have it. Whereas according to Rava, a fetus cannot actually acquire anything. So it all depends on the intention of the grabbers. So because the intention of the grabbers the first time around, they heard a rumor that the fetus had died, so they had full intention and grabbed it fully. Therefore, the first guys would get it in that case. And even though they then gave it back because they heard, oh, that's pregnant, and then it actually died, and the second guys took it, but nevertheless, the first guys already had full intention, and therefore, the first guys keep the television and the couch in that case. So there is a practical difference between the two opinions of Abaye and Rava. Okay, now we're going to offer a second refutation of the words of Rav Sheshat. Tashema, Tinok ben yom echad nochel umanchil, ben yom echadin ubad la. This is a Mishnah Masechet Nida that says a 1-day-old baby who's already born, even just 1 day old, can inherit and also bequeath. Inherit if, let's say, the father or mother, as we'll see in a second, die. But it's born already, so it can inherit that whatever property it would inherit, no matter what age it was. And if the baby dies, then that whatever it inherited, it will bequeath to whatever inheritors, siblings, or whoever would inherit that baby. Now, that's the end of the Mishnah. We infer only if it's a day old, it can inherit and bequeath. But if it's a fetus, then it cannot inherit and bequeath. So this is a challenge to Rav Sheshat, who says that even a fetus can acquire property. Here, a fetus cannot acquire property, cannot even inherit property. Rav Sheshat says, I have a way of explaining this Mishnah. Why this Mishnah choose to say only if it's a day old and not a fetus? Because it wants to teach us a law about inheriting from a mother. It's teaching us that if someone inherits from a mother, a baby, meaning that this baby is born and then the mother dies right after, then that baby will inherit from the mother. And then if that baby should die, even that very same day that it's born, then the paternal brothers of that baby will inherit. So even though it got it from the mother, but then once the baby has it, then if the baby dies, it only goes to the paternal side, as we saw in the previous perek. So, since this is the scenario, this scenario could only possibly happen if the baby was born. If the baby was a fetus, you can't have a mother who died and then the fetus be born. They assume that biologically it's impossible for a fetus to stay alive if the mother had died. In fact, at least with modern medicine, it could be that if a mother dies, sometimes a mother might be in a car accident or something, and still they can save the fetus afterwards if they get to it in time. But that would be very difficult. So assuming that a fetus cannot remain alive if the mother has died, so therefore this case could only be possible if the baby was born and immediately after the mother died, then that baby does inherit and bequeath. So this is only true if it's 1 day old, but if it's a fetus, not so. Why not? Because he will die first. It's assumed that a fetus is always going to die before the mother dies. It's impossible otherwise. And a child does not inherit its mother while in the grave. We saw this concept earlier. There are some people who can, let's say, someone has a son and a grandson, and the son dies. So when the grandfather dies, then the grandchildren still inherit, and it goes in whatever order it should have, as if the middle generation was alive, because children can inherit from their father. Even in the grave. So that does work. But a child does not inherit from his mother in the grave, and therefore this fetus actually was never born. And it was, and it's not alive now. And the fetus is not going to inherit the mother, such that it would go to the fetus and then go to the paternal brothers. No, that doesn't work. So that's why this case in the Mishnah is talking about only a baby 1 day old. It doesn't mean that a fetus cannot inherit. In fact, a fetus could inherit. Rav Shesha thinks. But here it just wants to teach us a special law regarding if a mother dies, and since the baby died first, even if it was a live baby, if the baby, let's say she gave birth to a baby, very good, it grows up even, and it dies, and then the mother dies, that kid does not inherit the mother, and the brothers of that kid will not then inherit from their deceased brother. When it comes to a mother dying, it only if the child is alive can it inherit. So that's why this case, it had to talk about only a child a day old, just because biologically they assumed it was impossible for a fetus to remain alive while the mother dies. Okay. Now, biological question. Does that mean to say that a fetus for sure always dies before a mother dies? But there was a time once when a mother died and they saw the fetus and it made three motions, three spasms, which looks like it's still alive. אמר מור בר רב אשר מידי דהבה הזנב הטלטאה שמפרכסת. And Mor bar Rav said, no, that's just like the tail of a lizard, that if you grab it and it comes off, it still will move around and have spasms for a little while after. But that's not because it's alive. Certainly there it's not alive. It's not attached to a brain or a heart or anything. And so that for sure is not alive, but this is just leftover electric sparks that are moving the muscles around. And that's the same with the fetus. If you see a mother die and then you're able to open and look at the fetus and it still moves around a little, it's not because it's alive, it's only spasms. Mor bered Rav Yosef b'shmei Rava Amar lomar shemima'et bechelek bechora. Mor, the son of Rav Yosef, in the name of Rava, said, explain this Mishnah in a different way. What is this whole Mishnah teaching us when it says that a 1 day old child inherits and bequeaths? Is teaching us a law specifically regarding Bechor. That's why he's saying if it's alive. So it has nothing to do with inheriting as a fetus or not. It's just not talking about that, but rather talking about the inheritance of a Bechorah, which only is affected by a child that's born and not by a fetus. In other words, you could really say that a fetus itself can inherit, but this Mishnah is not talking about that. It's talking about a firstborn. We're going to see two versions of what Rava said here, and the first version says as follows: that if it's born, then it will take away from the share of the firstborn. But it only does so if it's alive, if it was born. But if it's a fetus, that does not happen. Because the pasuk, in the context of teaching that a firstborn gets, it says if a man has two wives and one beloved, one not beloved, and they bear him children. It means they have to be born in order for this halacha to work. The difference would be as follows. When you want to find out how much a firstborn gets, you look at how many children are now born. And so let's say you have the firstborn and two other brothers, and they're all alive. So there's three sons altogether. So in that case, you calculate as follows. You take the entire estate and you split it up into 4 parts. And then the firstborn gets 2 parts, and the others get 1 part each. So in this case, you split it into 4 quarters, and then the firstborn gets a quarter as his double portion, and then the rest of it, which is 3/4 of the whole, you split equally for all 3. So the firstborn is getting his quarter as a firstborn, another quarter like a regular child, and then the other 2 get a quarter each. So the firstborn in the end will get half. That's if the child exists as born. However, if the brother is still a fetus, in this case, we have a firstborn who is alive. A brother who is also alive was born, and 1 fetus. In that case, here's what we do. We say, how many children are born here? How many sons? There's only 2. Since there's only 2, what we do is we take the entire estate and we split up into 3 parts. And 1/3 we give to the firstborn as his double portion. Good. Now we have 2/3 left. So when we come to calculate how much the firstborn will get, we ignore the fetus. But now that we have 2/3 left, that 2/3 the fetus will inherit along with his brothers. So we split that 2/3 into 3, which would be 2/9, and we give the fetus 2/9, the regular brother 2/9, and we give the firstborn also 2/9, which means in the end he'll get a third, which is 3/9 plus 2/9. He'll get 5/9 altogether, which is a little bit more than he would get if had the brother been alive, because 5/9 is a little bit more than a half. So that's the difference between the 2 cases, if it's born and not born. And this Mishnah wanted to teach us something about how much does the firstborn get, and that's why he's teaching only if it's born. If it's at least 1 day old, then it inherits and bequeaths, and the firstborn gets the amount with taking into account the child that was born. But if it's not born, then we do not take it into account when calculating how much the firstborn gets as part of his double portion. תאמר מור ברד רב יוסף משמד רבה, בן שנולד לאחר מיתת אביו, אינו ממעט בחלק בכורה, מה תמה ויעלדו לו, אמר החמנה והלקה. For the son of Rav Asher said, name of Rava, what we just explained, that a son that's born after the father dies, right? So at the time the father dies, this child was still not born. That fetus does not take away anything from the double portion that the firstborn will get. What's the source? Because it says v'yaldu lo, that he will bear him children only if they are born, and in this case they are not born. That's one version. Besura matnu hachi, that's how they taught it in Surah. Bepumbedita matnu hachi. Amar mor bered Rava Yosef mishemed Rava. Bechol shenolad lachar mitat aviv eno notel pishenayim. My tama yakir amar rachamana v'haleta deyakir. So this is a slightly different version in Pumbedita, that the firstborn that's born after the father dies. So this means, how would you have this? It could be twins, or it could be the father has multiple wives, and they're pregnant, and then he dies. And so one of his wives gives birth first, and that's the firstborn. of the father, and then the others also have children. So the firstborn that's born after the father dies does not get a double portion at all. Nobody gets a double portion, because you only get a double portion if you're born while your father is alive. How do you know that? Because it said, the pasuk says yakir, that the father will acknowledge the firstborn, will recognize the firstborn. So that means it has to be alive, has to be born for the father to say, oh, hello, you're my firstborn. But if the father already died while it was a fetus, then it never gets that status of firstborn to collect double. And so in here we don't have yakir. The halacha follows both of these versions of the statement of Mor, the son of Rav Yosef, who said this in the name of Rava. Both the first version, that a fetus will not deduct from the portion that we calculate to give to the firstborn, and the second version in Pumbedita, that a firstborn fetus that's born only after the father dies does not get a double portion at all. Next, we have yet another opinion about a fetus acquiring something. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mzakeh le'obad lo kana. Rabbi Yochanan says that if someone transfers ownership of an item to a fetus, the fetus does not acquire it. And if you'll ask a question from our Mishnah, where the father says, if my wife has a boy, then I'm going to give it 100 dinar, and it says it works, and he does give it, and if you ask that question, Rabbi Yochanan will say, oh, that's different, because a person's mind is close to his son. In other words, the problem is not essential, fundamental, that a fetus cannot acquire anything. Fundamentally, it can. And therefore, as long as a person has full intention, and a person will have that regarding his son, because a person is going to naturally love his son, and so he is giving full intention, and he is transferring fully this item even to the fetus' unborn son. So the fetus can acquire it in that case. But if it's not someone's son, then it's hard for a person to have full intention to transfer it over when the person isn't actually there to receive it. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, essentially a fetus can acquire. And that's what our Mishnah is saying. If it's a son, a person has full intention. But in practice, in general, if it's not someone's son, then a fetus cannot acquire, because the giver will not have sufficient intention to fully give it over. Amale Shemuel Rav Hana Bagdata'a. Pok aiti le be'asara. Ve'emar lach be'apai hu mzakeh le'ubar kana. Shemuel said to Rav Hana from Baghdad, go and get 10 people together, and I want to make a public announcement in front of them that someone who transfers something to a fetus, it works. So Shemuel thought that it works, and he wanted to make a halacha l'maaseh. And in order to make it official, you have to give a public lecture. A public lecture, there has to be at least a minyan there. Start a minyan to answer Kaddish, but you see from here that 10 people, 10 men, represents the public, as they considered a sibur. And so once he says it in public, then they'll tell others and everybody will know. So Shemuel wanted to decide the halacha that, yes, a fetus can acquire an item. However, even though he did that, the final halacha is that someone who transfers something to a fetus, the fetus does not acquire the item. Now an interesting case. A man tells his wife, I'm going to give all my property to the children that you will give birth to in the future. So maybe he already has children from this wife or a previous wife, but he wants to convince this current wife to have children. So he says, hey, listen, I'm going to give all my property to all the kids that will be born from you in the future. But then the son that was already born, it's called an older son here, kashisha, he might be young, but the point is he's already born, and he comes along and says, that person, he means me, what will be of me? So here's his father give away all the property to some future brothers that he's going to have. He says, what about me? You left me with nothing? And the father says, okay, you're right. You also can acquire like one of the sons. So you'll also acquire like the future kids will. Hanach vaday lakanu dakati letnehu. Now, what will be the outcome? The future kids will certainly not get any extra portion because they don't exist, and we're assuming a father cannot give a gift to a fetus that does not exist yet. I mean, that might not even be a fetus. She might not even be pregnant. So certainly they cannot acquire a gift. Now, these kids that will be born, they will inherit like regular heirs. Right? That's normal. They get the regular portion. But they're certainly not going to get any extra portion that will be taken away from some siblings that are already born. So that's for sure. But the question is, what about the older son who comes and says, I want an extra portion? Father says, fine, I'll give you an extra portion. Hi, it cholak letalya b'mkom benaya, od let lecholak letalya b'mkom benaya. This older one, do we say that he will have a share to the taleh? Taleh means a young animal, but here it's talking about it's young, but it's older compared to the future children. So here it calls him kashisha, here it calls him taliyah. Point is, the older sibling, does the older sibling get an extra portion? Even though when there are other brothers, and the other brothers will get a regular standard portion of the inheritance, and this older one will get a double or a bigger portion because the father said, yes, you're going to get like they will? Or do we say no, that the older brother will not get anything compared to the other brothers? The two sides are as follows. One side that he should not get is that the older brother's extra share depends on the younger brother's share, right? The father said to his wife, the new children you have will get an extra share. The older brother comes and says, me too, I want one too. He says, okay, you'll get one like them, but they don't get any extra share. So therefore the older brother also doesn't get any share. Do we say that? Or do you say what the father granted the older brother is independent of what the new kids will have? The kids, in fact, new kids will not have anything, but independently says to the older one, you're going to get an extra share, and then does it work? That's the question. And there's two sets of opinions. Rabbi Abin, Rabbi Maisha, Rabbi Yirmiyah Damre, it cholakt letalya b'mkom benaya. Rabbi Abu, Rabbi Chanina bar Papi, Rabbi Yitzchak Napacha Damri, let cholakt letalya b'mkom benaya. These three sages, Rabbi Abin, Rabbi Maisha, Rabbi Yirmiyah, they're from an older generation. They say that the older child does get an extra portion. Whereas the following three rabbis, Rabbi Abu, Rabbi Chanina bar Papi, and Rabbi Yitzchak bar Napacha, they are a younger generation than the first three. They say that the older child does not get anything. So there's a fun parallelism here that the older generation thinks that the older son does get an extra portion, and the younger generation of rabbis thinks that the older does not get any special consideration. So Rabbi Abu from the younger generation asks his teacher, Rabbi Yirmiyah, is halacha like us or is it like you? This was predictable. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, obviously the halacha is like us. Why? Because we're older than you. And halacha is not going to be like you, because you are just kids. Wow, what do you guys know? For sure, halacha is like the elders. Amarle midi bekashishuta talya milta. And now we have some intergenerational tension. And Rabbi Abu says, what, does the halacha depend on age? Betama talya milta. It depends on reason. You can't just say we're older, therefore the halacha is like us. Just because you're older doesn't necessarily mean you are wiser. But rather you have to have a better reason. So Yirmiyah from the older generation says, okay, v'tamamai, what's your reason? Tell me your reason, and we'll consider it. And Rabbi Abu, the younger one, says, Zil gabed Rabbi Abin de'as berata nihale. You want to know my reason? Go to Rabbi Abin. He was one of those colleagues, the colleague of Rabbi Yirmiyah. I discussed it with him, and I explained to him my reasoning. And furthermore, v'charchish ba'areshe be'midrasha. And he nodded his head in the study hall, which sounded like suggested that he agreed with it. He agreed with my reasoning. So don't ask me. Go ask your own colleague. I explained it to him, and he even gave me a nod of approval. So I went to the Biabin and said, oh, what was their reason of the younger ones? And he explained, if anyone would tell someone, go and acquire this item like a donkey would. Does he acquire it? Obviously not. A donkey cannot acquire anything. And so if you say to someone else, acquire this like a donkey, they do not acquire anything. And that's the same thing here. When the father tells the older child, okay, you acquire it like the unborn children will acquire. That's like nothing. That's like saying a donkey is acquiring it. That younger children don't acquire anything, and the older one is only like that. You're only linking it to someone who doesn't get anything at all. And therefore, he said, yeah, that makes sense, that the older one should not get anything at all. The next stop, we'll see the source and more analysis of this case when someone says, go and acquire something like a donkey. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.